So pull up my own instructions because I don't remember these websites off the top of my head. So we can say curl https / deb.nodesource.com/setup 19.x. We're going to pipe that into a new shell with sudo -e and bash, and we're going to put the outputs right there. And if you want, there's a link at the bottom of the screen on the slides, so you can just copy and paste all these things. You don't have to do it the hard way like I did. And hopefully I didn't misspell anything. Okay, just double checking. All right, looks like it's still working. And if you're wondering about why we're using apt versus apt-get, so apt-get is supposedly the lower level version of apt, and apt is the more human-friendly version. I know it doesn't seem that way, but that's just the reason, the difference between the two. They really do the same thing. But we generally try to use apt for most things. But in this case, we're using apt-get. Sudo apt-get install Node.js. All right, and we can double check that. So we can say node -- version, and we're 19.7. Nice, we're pretty far up there on the newer versions of Node. The next thing we want to do is let's install Git. It may be installed by default, but I just want to, actually I can just say Git. Yeah, Git's already installed. But if it's not, sudo apt install Git. And Git is, of course, version control, which we will talk about as well. We'll touch on it. But we installed Node.js, we installed Git. So next thing we do, let's set up our application. We need to establish the file system. We need to establish version control, always version control. Then we need to create a Node.js server. The third one we've already done. And the rest of it's, well, something you've probably done a million times already if you've created any sort of project. But let's do it together. We're on the server, so things always get a little bit trickier. Remember how I ran into that issue earlier where I sudoed that file, or I created that file but I didn't have sudo permission? That was really annoying. I don't want to sudo all my files. So let's just change ownership of that directory to myself, and that way I never have to sudo again. So we're going to use the chown command, change owner. We're going to say -r, recursively change ownership to myself. Then we're going to create a new application directory. Then we're just going to create a new Git repo. So other than the change ownership, these are things you've probably done a million times already. But let's do it together. So clear. And I'm going to cd up 1. So I am now in /var dub. I want to change owner, so I need to sudo for that because it's currently owned by not me. -r for recursive, and I'm just going to change it to myself, user, the group, and the name is the same. And we're going to change this current directory. OK. And you usually won't see an output when you change ownership. So next, let's make our application directory. So we're going to make dir, use the make dir command, and we're going to say /var. I know I'm already in the directory. I'm just being really, really pedantic. And we'll call it app, very original. And let's cd into app. And let's say git init to create a new Git repository here. Boop. All right. Everybody with me on this step? All right. So the next thing we do, let's create our application file. So we'll just say touch app.js. We're not going to do anything with it yet. And because this is a Node.js project, let's make sure it works with npm. And npm init will create a package JSON and all that fun stuff for us. So we'll just say npm init. You can call it whatever you want. I will leave it as app or full stack front end. It doesn't really matter. Version's fine, description's fine, entry point's fine. all this is, the defaults are totally fine. So now if we ls, we now have an app.js and we have package.json file. I didn't know about npm init for the longest time. It's pretty convenient. Okay, everybody make it to step 3 so far. We are hauling now. We're moving faster if you can't tell. So remember I said about incremental knowledge? Yeah, I don't have to explain every step anymore. This is great. We're becoming fluent. So step 3 was after we did our step on this new page, touch, we created app.js file, we npm initted it. Now let's create a basic node server in app.js. We've done that before. So there's a variety of ways to do it. Remember last time I said, hey, we're going to create a new one where we're just writing directly to the response rather than reading from a file? Because the file, it's one more step, and I just don't want to do that right now. I just want to write directly to the response. So I'll leave this up. Or actually, let's just follow along. Because we've already done this before, so I don't have to explain as much this time around. So again, on your server, we're going to open vi app.js. We don't need sudo this time. So insert, we're going to import h2p. And what's nice on the server, syntax highlighting is turned on by default. I didn't do anything. So that's great. Then we're going to create a server, which we've done before, http create server. That's a function. Let's just move that down here for my sanity. And that takes an argument that takes a request, always request, and then response. Always in that order. And then I'm just going to close it off here to make my life easier here. Now we can shortcut a lot of things we did before, so we don't need to pull from a file because we're just writing a very simple response. So we're just going to write directly to the response. We can do that. So we're going to say res.write. And you can put whatever you want. I'm going to say on the way to being a full stack engineer. I'm going to say full stack engineer because that's where I'm at right now. Full stack engineer. And close that off. But we can't just write willy-nilly because how does the server know that we're done writing? So we have to call end. We have to be explicit about when we're done with that response. Close it off, and we'll close it off and send it to the client at this point. Next, we didn't say which port we're going to listen on. Before we did this on a separate line, we can just chain these together rather than create a new server const and do the port. So we'll just say listen on port 3000. And then this is just a good practice, console.log. We'll just say server started. OK. And let's go ahead and write and quit this file. Whoops, caps lock on. There we go. So next, remember the one piece we're missing is we have an application, we have a node server, we have an Nginx server, but how do they know how to talk to each other? So we need to create what's called a virtual configuration, a virtual server. That way we'll tell any request that comes into our server, we'll say, hey, Nginx, route here. Just proxy all the requests from Nginx to our node server. So we're going to use that proxy pass directive that we talked about. So this is a little bit different, a little bit off the beaten path, but this will make our lives a little bit easier to reason about. So we're not messing around with the default HC or default Nginx configuration. So you want a sudo vi etc Nginx sites enabled and create something called fsfe. The name of this actually doesn't matter. I just say full stack front end for consistency across the board when I'm modifying it later. You can name it whatever you want. A good practice is actually name it your domain name. And you can call it a .com. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't affect the actual configuration. But in my instance, I'm going to keep it FSFE. OK, so let's go ahead and do that. Sudo bi etc Nginx sites enabled full stack front end. All right. So what we need to do here is create a virtual server block. And why we're creating this and not modifying the default is we're just taking out all the extra comments, all the extra things we don't actually need, and we're just going to distill it down to these are the actual things you need to run your server, just to make our lives easier down the road. So I'll give you a second to copy this, and then I will walk through it. Otherwise, it's harder to follow along if I'm typing and talking at the same time.